Hi, it's Kirby Summers. Today is December 24th, 2024. It is Christmas Eve. When I got up earlier today, earlier than almost 6 o'clock in the morning, I heard that Bill Clinton was experiencing a fever and that he is in the hospital. Now, I want to preface this by saying that I am neither a Democrat nor a Republican. At the age of 17, I studied the landscape of the politics in America, where I live and where I was born and where I've been most of my life, with the exception of the times I've traveled elsewhere on vacation, and decided that I wasn't going to be part of voting for either a Democrat or a Republican. Additionally, whenever I have spoken to survivors of the types of A, B, U, S, E, S, we have been hearing about more recently, and connected to, let's say, Jeff, and now to Sean Combs, Jay-Z. There's even something on Beyonce that is being intentionally suppressed. However, I want to say that whenever I have spoken with a survivor, they too claim no allegiance to either party. So I am going to be discussing an article. Actually, I uploaded an article on my Substack for free on Bill Clinton, who had a Jeff type person previous to meeting Jeff, who kept him supplied with the same type of, let's say, MINORS, plural, as Epstein is alleged to have done while they were fast friends. So before I get started, I do want to thank Prisms 8342 for his very generous super thanks. And by the way, I've had super thanks now, I think, for almost 3 weeks. And I have had a lot of love come my way. I want to thank each and every one of you for doing a super thanks on my channel. It can be done with the three little dots that are underneath this sort of video. And what I normally say is, because a lot of people don't know that this platform keeps 40%. The intermediary banking system that is used to pay the content provider, they keep about 9-10%. And so ultimately, somebody like myself who uploads content, information, facts versus Mockingbird, we get approximately 50%. However, some of you have been very, very incredibly kind with your time, and you've jumped over to my website to make a one-time contribution, where I then skip the middle person and only maybe pay 10% to the banking institution, and I keep roughly 90%. So I want to thank each and every one of you, because you make it possible for me, even on Christmas Eve, to sit here and convey to you information that perhaps you're not aware of. While I did upload an article out on my Substack, and it's free, I thought I would just do that to remind people or inform people that before Jeff, our friend Bill had other suppliers of that type of, I hate to even call it service. Okay, let's call it servitude. Let's just call it servitude because we see what that is. What I wanted to go over, though, is the unaliving of Don Henry and Kevin Ives, because I tweeted the hash with the hashtag Clinton body count. I tweeted photographs of 16-year-old Don Henry, 17-year-old Kevin Ives, and another very good former friend of the Clintons who was found to have ended his own life in the park. Okay, I mean, I'm not going to even mention his name because, well, for obvious reasons, I just want to keep this on this platform without interruption. So on August 23rd, 1987, the bodies of 16-year-old Don Henry and 17-year-old Kevin Ives were hit by a freight train around like 4 o'clock in the morning, the wee hours of the morning that day, in the town of Alexander, Arkansas. And, they're now known as the boys on the tracks. Now, the engineer braked and blew his horn, but the train didn't stop in time and rolled over the bodies. I'm going to just give you the basic info and then I'm going to explain further. So stay tuned if you have not really taken a chance to listen to this because it's important. A second autopsy revealed that Don Henry had been stabbed in the back, and Kevin Ives' skull may have been crushed prior to being run over, meaning that they were unalived before they were placed by the train track. So the deaths were initially ruled an accident, the result of boys in a deep sleep on the tracks while incapacitated due to a high amount of THC allegedly present in their blood. The parents of the boys insisted on a second autopsy, and so they exhumed the bodies, and it was ruled that homicide was a likely thing, that they were unalived versus an accident. Okay. And then later, another pathologist ruled that Don Henry's shirt showed evidence of a stab wound. So again, the background on this is that the crew at about 4 o'clock in the morning on August 23rd, 1987, on the 75 car, 6,000 ton Union Pacific freight train. So this is not even a regular train. This is a freight train, a train that is more than a mile long, and it was traveling at a rate of more than 50 miles an hour while on the way to Little Rock, Arkansas. That the crew spotted the two boys lying motionless across the tracks about 300 feet away. And then members of the crew stated that the bodies were partially covered by a green tarp. Although the police disputed the existence of the tarp, and then the tarp disappeared, so it was never recovered from the scene. So near where they were found uh, was a 22 caliber rifle and a flashlight. The boys didn't move, despite the sound and the vibration of the approaching gigantic train, the emergency brakes and its horn. They were keeping an eye on these kids and they didn't see their bodies sort of go into instant just reflection of, or what's going on. They're hearing this, they're supposed to be hearing the noise, feeling the vibration, but nothing happens, clearly because they're already unalived. All right. So more than 1,000 feet of decelerating train crossed the point where the bodies lay before it came to a stop. The train's crew reported the incident to railroad and law enforcement authorities. And so 40 minutes later, at around 4:40 a.m., the police arrived on the scene. The boys had reportedly left home around midnight to go hunting. The gun and the flashlight near the bodies suggested they were using a hunting technique known as spotlighting, which involves using a bright light to scan for animals whose eyes brightly reflect the light after dark. So the autopsies, the state medical examiner, Fahmy Malak, ruled the deaths an accident as a result of grain intoxication. You know, that thing that is like a cigarette, but not, saying the boys had smoked the equivalent of 20 of these green cigarettes. And then they fell asleep on the tracks. That's what the state medical examiner, Fahmy Malak, said. But the parents, they did not accept this finding, and they conducted their own investigation. In March of 1988, James Garriott of San Antonio offered a second opinion, and he was skeptical about these findings regarding the green cigarettes. Like, that each of these kids smoked 20 of them. That's almost an impossible scenario. A grand jury ruled the deaths a probable homicide. So not even homicide. Maybe, question mark. Nothing definitive. When it was found that Don Henry's skirt contained, sorry, let me backtrack. Don Henry's shirt contained evidence of a stab wound to the back, and Kevin Ives' skull may have been crushed by his own rifle, the ruling was changed to definite homicide. Okay, so like the parents, if it had not been for the parents pushing, initially this would have just ended as an accident. Then it was labeled maybe a homicide. But then when it was discovered that Kevin's skull may have been crushed by his own rifle, only then was it changed to definite homicide. Don Henry's father also noted that he did not believe his son would have risked his gun, you know, like, like by putting it on the ground, that he really treasured the gun and he would not have wanted it to be scratched. At this point, if you are listening, stay tuned until the end. I want to just ask you to please give this a like. A lot of podcasts and podcasters, such as myself, are being shadow banned. By this point in time, I really should have well over 100,000 followers. What I have noticed, and what other people have noticed who also upload content with Truth versus Mockingbird, is that we see our numbers get lower and lower and lower every time we log on. So that I have personally witnessed my likes going down. My views are different when I go into the back end, or when I look at it, I'm told that it's almost twice or 3 or 4 times of the amount that shows on the screen. Therefore, it is shadow banned. Hence, the reason I will ask you to kindly give this a like, and the commenting helps. The commenting helps. All right, let me just keep going. Oh, by the way, if you haven't subscribed, take a moment to do so, because this is where I upload content almost every couple of days with information that is not really being presented. Let's say in the Jay-Z case, in the Sean Combs case, in the Jeff case, which I have been examining for a very long time, with additional people. So I usually take a very different approach to uncovering information. Many people consider me a dot connector extraordinaire. And you know what? Sometimes you really do have to pat yourself on the back. I put a lot of work into the information I share with you here, the information I share on my platforms, Patreon and Substack. And yeah, I can do some serious dot connecting. Okay, so let me just get back. The investigation. So despite pressure from the victim's parents, the county sheriff, James Steed Jr., refused to investigate the case. He just wasn't going to do it. In February of 1988, Dan Horman, the parents' attorney, and the county prosecutor finally reached an agreement that Steed would begin an investigation if the parents stopped criticizing him. So what was happening at the time is that it had become a televised case. People knew about this because initially the thought was, oh, these kids, there was an accident and then all this stuff happened and the parents did not stay quiet. So what we're witnessing, for example, in the Jay-Z allegations and the Sean Combs allegations is that there's a lot of noise, and that is what gets the attention. On the one hand, when mainstream covers it, it's income producing for them, right? Because that's a lot of clicks. They may not go into the information, let's say, that podcasters that are like truthers, like myself. And in my case, I'm a former victim, now survivor, shedding light into the areas that are unseen. But we need to make noise. When something is wrong, these are the cases that get exposure. So at that time, the parents were making so much noise that this was in the media. Okay. And so the sheriff basically said, well, he's going to help if they stop criticizing him. The prosecutor reached this agreement with Stead. And however, what happened was, even though the investigation resumed, technically, it was sabotaged. Several witnesses who were scheduled to testify before the grand jury were found dead. So these people just died. They're supposed to show up to give their testimony, talk about what they knew, and suddenly they're unalived. I don't think that's an accident. I don't think you would think it's an accident, right? So Sheriff Steed is also said to have lied about where he sent the boys' clothing for examination. He sent them to the Arkansas State Crime Lab and not to the FBI. I want to pause here and say that the FBI, as it pertains to the Jeff case and as it pertains to the other one that came before that, that has a lot of attention on it because it came up again during the Jeff case in Nebraska. It starts with an F. I'm going to spell it Franklin. We know from victim testimony in several of these cases that the FBI is part of the like a series of agencies, let's call them, that help to, instead of exposing, but to help. And I'm going to leave that blank because you can fill that part in. So Hammond also lost the trust of the parents because he is said to have prevented the case from being solved. This is what the parents thought. So the FBI did take over the case in 1994. Now, that's a long time after the incident, but came to, quote, no conclusion. And the investigation, hey, they dropped it. A few months later, by 1995, they dropped it, allegedly due to political pressure. So the Arkansas State Police investigation also arrived at, guess what? Nothing. No results, nothing. The mother of Kevin Ives, Linda, who worked to solve and investigate the case, and she went after these people. She was on message boards when message boards were a thing. She was on television. She did everything she could to try to get resolution and to have the truth come out for her son and for both boys. Well, regrettably, she passed away in June of 2021. So here's a list of the unaliving and the names of the people who were supposed to show up and give testimony. Keith McCaskill was an informant for Dan Harmon and had taken aerial photographs of the crime scene. He was unalived in 1988, 2 days after Sheriff Steed lost his reelection. That's number one, the first of the 5 witnesses. The second is Keith Cohn, who was scheduled to testify before the grand jury in the case, and he was unalived during a motorcycle accident in early January 1989. The third person is Greg Collins, who was also called to testify before the grand jury and was an acquaintance of Keith Cohn. And he was unalived by 3 shots from a shotgun on January 26, 1989. The fourth is Daniel Booney Bearden. He was another witness who disappeared without a trace in March of 1989. And then the fifth is Jeffrey Edward, whose body was found in a landfill in April 1989. And he was also not just going to be a witness, but he was linked to the case itself. These were all classified as MURDER. I know it's ridiculous that we cannot say that word anymore on any platform. Except, despite the fact that it was known that these people were unalived intentionally, well, nobody was arrested. So the usual theory given about the boys' deaths involves the trafficking of narcotics. The theory is that the boys were unalived when they witnessed a drop from an airplane. And we know this is what was happening. We know that this is how the Iran-Contra situation was handled. We know that Florida was a place. We know that also Arkansas was a place. Later, I believe it was 1990s, mid-1990s, we know that Southern Air Transport moved on over to Ohio, where some of the people that we discuss on this channel frequently are also connected to, right? So it was said at the time when Southern Air Transport decided to move from Miami to Ohio, oh, that Wexy's Limited company, they needed the help, and like they're thinking people are never going to find out that it's connected to the 3-letter agency to help with his goods in the Orient. So I'm just saying that these drops from planes, and we know that Barry Seal was one of the ace pilots used by the 3-letter agency. And then clearly there's stuff that happened with Barry Seal, and he too was unalived. So that in this case with the boys, that they actually saw one of these planes dropping the merchandise, and that they could not be allowed to remain, let's say, breathing, because they would clearly tell their parents, and this was a hush-hush operation in Mina. And so this was linked clearly to what Barry Seal was doing at Mina. The 1994 conspiracy theory movie, The Clinton Chronicles, blamed the cover-up of the murders on Clinton, who was the governor of Arkansas at the time and was accused to have known about the drug trafficking in his state. The case was profiled on the television program Unsolved Mysteries. Investigative journalist Mara Leverett published the book, The Boys on the Tracks. And then it basically dealt with the case and the alleged involvement of the authorities in the unalivement. In 1996, Linda Ives and film producer Patrick Matriciana released the documentary Obstruction of Justice, The Mina Connection, in which they made allegations against the authorities. According to the film, the two boys had witnessed the merchandise deal and were unalived by two local police officers. County Prosecutor Dan Harmon is also said to have been involved and later helped the perpetrators with the support of the authorities. So that this guy who had presented himself to the families as being on their side, and this happens time and time and time and time and time again, and I cannot emphasize and tell you, and yes, I'm getting heated because I am thinking about the attorneys that presented themselves in the Jeff case as people who were, quote, helping the victims, when in reality, they worked for the three-letter agency. And if you don't know about that, come over to my Substack. You know, it's hard for me sometimes because while I try to be somewhat impartial in sharing information with you on this platform, it's personal. You know, it's personal. It's personal because it affects all of us. And when we're in a stressful situation, because I know, for example, that when I was held HOSTAGE, when I was KIDNAPPED and held against my will, I called the police. I dialed 911, not once, but twice, and I got no help. So that when you're in a position where you think that, well, somebody in authority has responded, as in the case with the parents of these boys, and then these people are working against you. They're just trying to just make believe, pretend that they're on your side while they're just gathering information from you to see how much you know, and then not helping you. And really, in this instance, who was there to help? If there's like such a tremendous cover up and it involves people that were later given a promotion. Think about what I just said, promoted into the White House. So, Harmon, who had been representing the parents of Ives and Henry, was arrested in 1997 on charges of racketeering, conspiracy, extortion, and substance possession with intent to distribute. He was sentenced to 11 years in prison. I want to interject here and say, you know what? That may or may not be true. What happens is that at some point, if someone is thought to perhaps be too knowledgeable about a certain situation and or be on the, you know, they don't need this person that much anymore, as we're seeing with Sean Combs, as we're seeing with allegedly Jay-Z. They're older. You know, they're out of the age range where they're going to make any money for, let's say, the music industry. And in this case, Harmon perhaps had exceeded his useful life term. And so, yeah, let's put him in jail. This way he will always, and maybe he was guilty of these things, but he was probably guilty of these things and more, and just got away with it for a very long time. And then the two accused police officers denied any involvement with the case and sued Matriciana and his company for defamation. Again, the same tactic that Jay-Z is now using against Busby. We can study every one of these historical cases and see parallels. And when you find a pattern, those are the things that you have to keep an eye on, is pattern. Do we see a pattern here? Oh, that looks exactly like what's happening over here. So that's what I do. I look for clues of patterns, and that is how I delve into my study and delve into my research. I look for clues of patterns. And when you look at this case, you see patterns and you see silence and you see the unaliving of people. And, will we ever, speaking of Jay-Z and of the hip hop industry as we know it, will we ever know the extent of the unaliving that's happened? No, no, we won't. In closing for the Don Henry and Kevin Ives story that I presented to you today, and if you haven't liked, please like. uh, so they sued for defamation. A judge awarded them $600,000. However, Matriciana appealed. Now, it takes a lot of time, okay? It takes a lot of time. Appealed, and it was overturned in 2001. So there's a lot of wasted taxpayer money, wasted time in these cases that are basically high profile and cases that linger on in our memories, or at least they should. The news cycle now is, it's no longer like Andy Warhol said, everybody gets their 15 minutes of fame. If you get 15 seconds of somebody's attention, that's considered a lot. Try not to let that become part of your norm. Try to give things time to settle. It takes time for something to settle in somebody's brain. Don't go for being dumbed down. Fight back against that, And the way you fight back is you don't keep scrolling, scrolling, scrolling. Take a walk, take a drive, go for a run, go to the gym, go to the coffee house, sit down, let things fall in, because I find myself that when I'm working on a story, if I walk away, that's where the answers start to fall into place. They don't necessarily fall into place as I'm writing or reading court documents, or even after I've interviewed someone. They fall into place as I am pondering. So I don't do 15-second bites. I will sit on something and then revisit it years later. Okay, guys, I want to thank again those of you who have taken the initiative to super thank me on this platform. And really, I hope everyone is having a happy holiday season. In about a week's time, we're going to be ushering in 2025. And now, let's hope that we can start getting real justice. Okay. Have a good day, everyone. Bye.